Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari A to Z Flashback, a series of explorations of the 150 games that make up Atari Flashback Classics for Nintendo Switch. Today's game is Starship. This was a 1977 release for Atari 2600, programmed by Bob Whitehead. It was part of the launch lineup for the platform. The game is the first space-themed game available for the Atari 2600 and was based on the Atari arcade game Starship 1 from earlier the same year. Starship 1 was actually a comparatively advanced arcade game for the time, featuring a first-person perspective and gameplay reflected onto a half-silvered mirror with a space-themed background rather than simply unfolding on a monitor in front of the player. It was also an early arcade game to make use of analog controls, which would become a bit less popular in the following years. Starship 1's arcade incarnation is also home to what is believed to be the first Easter egg in any video game, predating the well-known one in the 2600's adventure by several years. By pressing the controls in the right sequence, the player can make the message "Hi Ron" appear, this being a reference to one of the game's designers, Ron Milner, and get 10 free games. Starship on the 2600, meanwhile, was removed from Atari's catalogue in 1980. The game wasn't that well received on its original release, so it's conjectured Atari wanted to quietly let some of its games go and focus on its best-selling, more well-known titles. This makes original Starship cartridges quite hard to find these days, so if you're into rare games for your 2600, this is one to watch out for. So, let's go play Starship.
Okay, welcome back once again to Atari Flashback Classics, where today we're taking a look at Starship. In many ways, sort of the spiritual precursor to Star Raiders, I guess. It's nowhere near as good as Star Raiders, but it's got some interesting ideas. So, let's take a look at the manual first of all. Starship! Use your joystick controllers with this game program, blah 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 blah. Want to really test your aim in space? Slide the difficulty switch to the A position during Starship games and your laser missiles become weaker. This makes it necessary for you to hold the enemy space objects on target longer. Slide the difficulty to A position during Lunar Lander TM games and you must be exactly on target before you score points. So, there are several different games in this that we can play. There is the Starship game, which is the one that's based on the arcade version. You're sitting in your Starship cockpit, and your television screen is suddenly transformed into the window of your Starship. With the joystick controller, steer the ship deep into space. A constant barrage of meteors whiz towards your window. Eerie enemy space objects float from the darkest parts of space. So yeah, in the Starship modes, you're basically trying to avoid crashing into things and shooting the enemies that it's possible to destroy. So you see you get 1 point for starfighters, which are definitely not the Starship Enterprise, 2 points for flying saucers, 3 points for space robots, and 2 points for space modules. So in one-player games, in game number 1 you have slow targets, game 2 you have slow targets that appear 1 at a time instead of 2 at a time in game 1. In game 3 there are fast targets, game 4 is... Okay, that's strange. So game 1 is 2 targets at a time, game 3 is 1 at a time, and then game 4 is 2 at a time again. There are 2-player games in this as well, which means that the second player can actually control the space module. Okay, so yeah, so the second player basically has control of one of the space objects, and the second player tries to avoid getting hit. So we'll skip over those games for a minute because I'm by myself here, but it basically plays the same way. The player who's in control of the Starship is trying to shoot things. Then there are the warp drive games. You're sitting in your cockpit watching space whiz by. With the right joystick controller, steer your ship past the indestructible asteroids. Your mission, to cover as much distance as possible. Your space meter ticks away each parsec of distance in the upper right corner of the space window. Parsec, a measure of space distance which equals 19.2 trillion miles. You lose 1 parsec each time you collide with an asteroid. To increase your speed into space, press the red controller button. You'll hear the engines roar. Remember that word. You'll hear the engines roar into the fastest speed of all, warp drive. During the final 16 seconds of each game, your score will flash off and on at the top right of the screen. Yeah, so like a lot of other early Atari 2600 games, these games all last for 2 minutes and 16 seconds because that, supposedly, is an optimal amount of time for people to be able to have fun. If you want to know more about that, there is a thread on the Atari Age forum where someone who used to work for Atari back in the day had a bit of insight about that. But yeah, that was basically it. It was there. research indicated that people seem to have a good amount of fun with that amount of time. Other than that, it was fairly arbitrarily chosen. Okay, then the final games are Lunar Lander. So it's not quite the same as the Lunar Lander arcade game, but you're basically trying to land a space module on a moon. Okay, well, let's have a go. So, one-player starship, slow, dual robot, saucers, fighters, obstacles. So good a place as any to start. Game reset. So, as you can see, we are in space. And I have crashed into a thing. So what you have to do is fire your lasers, and you'll notice that the lasers kind of stay in the distance when you've fired them. And so the easiest way to actually hit targets in this is to fire your laser before you reach something and kind of steer your lasers into the target. And all we're trying to do is score as many points as possible in that 2 minute and 16 second time period. And as you can see, we are seeing up to 2 space objects at the same time. And so when you have a choice of objects, you might want to think about prioritizing your targets slightly to go for the higher value ones first. And that's how you maximize your score. And that's basically all there is to this game. I do find this game kind of interesting though, because you can just about feel the genesis of Star Raiders in this. Not just through the gameplay, but in terms of presentation as well. Like the way your reticle's presented in the middle of the screen as those sort of dash marks. That's very similar to how Star Raiders presents your sights, your gun sights. Okay, so the next mode is one-player starship, slow, robots, saucers, fighters, obstacles. There's only one at a time. Let's skip that one because it's going to be basically the same. All right, now we try one with fast robots, saucers, fighters, and obstacles. Or should we do that with? We do it with dual. Okay, so fast, double action. Off we go. And you can now hear in the background, ouch! Our engines have reached maximum velocity. Yeah, this is much trickier. But actually much more interesting as a result. Whoops! Because in this you end up confronted with a lot more interesting decisions to make. So it's not just about shooting everything. Some of those targets you have to let go. Because your turning circle is so sluggish. And crashing into stuff wastes so much time. You just need to get out of the way. Oops. Oh. Yeah, this is much harder. Much harder. It's quite satisfying when you do manage to hit something, though. And our time is running out once again. Dodge past those asteroids. There we go. Okay, so that's basically how the standard Starship game works. So you've got different combinations of those. You can have a fast or a slow game, and you can have single or double targets coming towards you at once. So that's pretty straightforward. One player Starship slow modules. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, I thought the modules game were just 2-player games, but let's have a go. Okay, don't really know what's going on here. I think they've got the setup for that wrong, because that looks like a 2-player game to me. 2-player Starship, slow, obstacles and modules. Yeah, they got that wrong. Okay, skip a days. 1-player warp drive with single obstacle. So in this one, all you need to do is avoid the asteroids while holding down the button to make yourself go faster. Now remember that description of your engines roaring to life. Please enjoy the sound of the Atari 2600 roaring to life. Listen to that majestic sound. And yeah, so this game mode is about nothing more than avoiding those asteroids and trying to get as far as you can while listening to your 2600 chainsawing your ears. So that's how this game works. As you can see, it's fairly straightforward. It's actually been quite considerate of me today. Because often you'll find yourself playing a game with this where you have to slow down. But it's actually been quite generous with the asteroid placement today. I mean, I'm not complaining. Oh, there we go. I knew it wouldn't last. I don't know. I mean, this game mode is rubbish, but it's also like strangely hypnotic and addictive. Particularly because in Atari Flashback Classics they put in an achievement for reaching 60 parsecs or more. And it's one of those achievements that is surprisingly difficult. But you always end up just coming really close to it. And then just not quite making it the last second, which I suspect is what is about to happen to us in this game. Yeah, 58. Yeah, I suspect in order to get 60 or more, you need to do a completely flawless game on that, which is kind of random. So kind of difficult to make yourself do. Let's have a go at warp drive with dual obstacles, which is exactly the same sort of thing, except now you're avoiding 2 things instead of just 1. Which again makes it slightly more interesting. I do find it interesting that they actually withdrew this from sale. Because, I mean, no, it's not the 2600's finest hour by any means, but I mean, it's not terrible. There are worse games on the 2600. There are worse games by Atari on the 2600. So I mean, this isn't offensively bad or anything, but like I say, I believe the theory is that Atari wanted to kind of shed what it saw as dead weight, or stuff that it didn't believe was going to sell particularly well in the future. And because Starship only had sort of fairly mediocre reviews even on its original release, I think they just thought, well, sod it. Let's concentrate on stuff that people do like. So they did. And it worked out alright for them. For a while, at least. That's such an awful noise. Such an awful noise. I apologise for putting you through it, but I've got to deal with it on headphones, so... You know, if I have to suffer, you all have to suffer with me. And nowhere near as high a score on this dual obstacle mode. Oh dear. It's trickier than it looks, is the trouble. Because it's not really doing 3D properly. Yeah, there's a certain kind of adjustment period as you customize yourself to the controls. Customize? Customize? That's not really a word, is it? Acclimatize yourself to the controls. Alright, one player Lunar Lander slow. I don't think I've ever played this mode before, so I'm interested to give it a try. So, reset. So, in this mode, we simply control the lunar thing. And we have to... Was that it, really? I was expecting something a little bit closer to, you know, the original Lunar Lander arcade game, but no, this is literally move your sprite over the other sprite and press the fire button. Oh dear me. You can play this mode in 2-player as well. One player gets to control the moon for the height of lunar landing excitement. Yeah, there's no risk in this whatsoever, so... Yeah, this is not good. There's no risk, there's no challenge, there's no anything really. It's just exactly what you see here. It does still have those excellent blippity bloop sounds in the background though, so I can give it that at least. This is one of those games where 2 minutes and 16 seconds is going to feel like much too long, isn't it? Oh dear lord, this is tedious. See, the animals were repetitive and boring, but at least they had some challenge. But there's no challenge here whatsoever. There's nothing getting in your way. There's nothing stopping you. And how quickly you score points is purely down to randomness. It's how close the moon appears to you. It's got to be something more than that. Ah, one with obstacles. Right. That makes things a bit more interesting. One player Lunar Lander, slow with obstacles. Let's give this one a go. That said, there's only 4 obstacles. So, not a lot going on. I beg your pardon, 6 obstacles. Do they actually destroy you? They do! But again, all that does is waste time rather than actually cause your game to be over. Oh dear me. Starting to get a better idea of why this was less than fondly regarded now. I can also imagine that people might have been a bit miffed. Hold on, when did the Lunar Lander arcade game come out? I don't know if it was before or after this is the trouble, offhand without looking it up, and I'm not in a position to do that right now, unfortunately. But I suspect if Lunar Lander, the arcade game, came first, and then people came to this game on the 2600 expecting a home version of Lunar Lander, they would have been annoyed. Because this is not Lunar Lander. This is, like I say, this is just move the sprite over the other sprite. The game. In fact, you know what? I'm going to take just a moment. I'm actually going to look that up live. If you just bear with me a moment while I investigate. So, Lunar Lander arcade game. Lunar Lander arcade game came out in 1979. And Starship for Atari 2600. Okay, so Starship actually came out first. So Starship was the first to use the name Lunar Lander, and then Lunar Lander, the arcade game, ended up being something completely different and better. All right, one play Lunar Lander, fast obstacles. What are other options? Two play Lunar Lander, and that's it. Okay, let's just have a go at the fast Lunar Lander game, and. Well, it's faster. I don't know if fast is necessarily the word I'd use, though. And those obstacles, they're only moving in vertical lines, aren't they? There's no sort of horizontal or diagonal hazards. So they're pretty easy to avoid. Yeah, this is not good. This is not good at all. I mean, like I say, the other game modes in this, they're not great, but they're inoffensive. Whereas this is just rubbish. There's no real skill. There's very little threat. There's no sense of progression. It doesn't get harder as you play. It doesn't feel rewarding. Yeah, bit of a stinker. But that's fine. I mean, as I've mentioned numerous times on this series before, if this was a launch game for the 2600, what you need to remember is that for the most part, people didn't know what a video game was. They didn't know what made a good video game and what was really going to work for players and what was going to prove addictive and popular and that sort of thing. And so it was kind of inevitable that we'd end up with stuff that is not very fun, because you have to try different things, because you can't just do the same thing over and over again. You have to try different things, and sometimes you'll get them right and sometimes you'll get them wrong. And Starship does a bit of both. Starship sort of shows the potential for first-person space combat, which would then be built on with stuff like Star Raiders. And then it does things like that Lunar Lander mode there, which is less good. But then this could have easily influenced some other types of game as well, like the warp drive game in this. You can see some DNA in common with racing games there, except it's a racing game where you're moving up and down as well as left and right as well. So, yeah. So, while this perhaps isn't the best game in the 2600's library for all sorts of reasons, it's certainly an interesting part of Atari's history, particularly when you consider that it was basically erased from Atari's history after a certain point, for one reason or another. But it is what it is, and yeah, elements that work, elements that very much do not work as well. Let's leave it there for today then. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.